Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Think on These Things podcast. We are so excited to have you on this special episode with us today. We have some special guests, if you haven't noticed already, our friends, the spectacular, wonderful, amazing people, the creators of the amazing Dear Young Married Couple, Adam and Carissa King.
Yes.
Thank you guys for joining us.
We are honored to be with you guys. We love the Think on These Things podcast. We love Evan and Ashley. We love everything you're doing. So
we love
we're
the
honored.
Grizzles.
Yes.
Thank you. We're going to actually cut that out and put that at the beginning of our podcast every time, just to bring a little bit of validity to what we're doing over here. So, we're operating on opposite sides of the coast, but, through the magic of FaceTime and Zoom, we have gotten closer over the last few months, and we're just excited to have our friends on here with us.
Yes.
Honey, why don't you tell the people that maybe don't know, if you don't know them, you've been living under a rock.
Yes.
So let's come out from under the rock and let's learn about the amazing King family. Honey, tell us about the Kings.
Yeah. So they are a gifted therapist, coach team. They travel across the country speaking at churches, leadership events, not only across the United States, but across the world. They've done marriage retreats in other countries, and they are missions minded, very involved in their own church, the Rock Church in Sacramento, California.
That's right. Shout out to the Young family.
And they are doing a podcast. They are doing monthly live date night.
Yeah.
Tons of content. And they are parents of 2 little kids.
Yes. Beautiful little children.
Yes. So
Thank
it's
you.
amazing. I'm not sure when they sleep
They don't.
and when they rest.
Right now.
But
No.
they
During this
Our
podcast.
kids
right
are
now.
sleeping. Sorry.
I thought you meant like Adam's going to answer while Carissa naps and Carissa naps while Adam answers. I was like, man.
That's great. We're all about it.
Sequence napping. So what did we leave out, Adam and Carissa? Because out of all the things you do, there has to be something we forgot about.
Yeah.
Oh, you got plenty. You got
I
plenty.
fly fish.
Fly fish. Oh, my boy. I need to
We
try some fly
backpack.
fish.
We love backpacking.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And we'll link everything down below in the comments or in the description. That way you guys can get on their monthly live date night. It's incredible.
Yes.
And you can go on there. You can find their podcast. You can find their Instagram page. You can find them for one-on-one couples coaching or coaching together or as a couple, because they do incredible work.
Yes.
So, but we brought them on for a subject that's sensitive. And the reason that we brought them on for this is because, as you can see, the way they approach things, if you've been a part of anything that they've done, they approach it with respect, understanding, love. They're not like me. They don't get too excited and start yelling and swinging from the rafters. They're like my wife in that very calm, calming presence. And there are subjects in the world that we don't like to talk about, but we have to talk about.
Yeah.
And one of those topics is pornography.
Yes.
And so today we're going to talk about that. And let me just give you a little disclaimer. I'm probably not going to talk a lot today. Why would I talk when I'm sitting at the table with experts? So, honey, why don't you dive into the conversation with them, and I'll raise my hand when I'm ready.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you guys do a lot of marriage retreats and a lot of ministering, counseling to pastors and ministers across the country. And so we're here to hear what you have to say about pornography recovery, what you can do when you find yourself stuck in this cycle. You're afraid to reach out. You're afraid to get help. You know that you need to do something. And so we want to hear what you guys have to say about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, first of all, thank you for having us on. and
Seriously.
the very awesome intro, and also breaching this topic.
Yeah, so vital.
It's a very, very important topic. It's starting to be talked about a lot more as of late. And I think that's good because of the stats and how many people we know are struggling with this.
Yeah.
So, thank you guys.
Yeah, it's actually so much more common than we realize. We don't have stats on any apostolic organizations yet. We hopefully we'll have that in the next coming years, but right now we have stats from conservative organizations like ours, and those stats are pretty revealing. And I would say in the work we've done with ministers and pastors in conservative organizations, we would agree with those numbers. And so, for instance, 7 out of 10 lay leaders in the church admit to visiting pornographic websites at least once a week. And this is lay leaders like ushers, Sunday school teachers, etc. And then, talking about full-time pastors, actually 5 out of 10 full-time pastors admitted to the exact same thing.
Wow.
Looking at some research from a Southern Baptist organization. And so these aren't just numbers, though. These are people in our
Yeah.
Right.
pews working, doing the work of the Lord, and genuine people that want to serve God and fulfill the calling that God has put on their lives. And they're crippled
Yeah.
with this. I mean, some people will call it an addiction. It depends
Sure.
on your view in terms of what you would say is an addiction or not. But they're crippled with what might be this thorn in their flesh.
Sure.
Right.
And there's hope. There are ways that
Yeah.
people can find healing.
It really is. I was actually working with someone just recently that that has been doing some really great work around this subject, and with his wife. And it was really awesome to see. He's like, I feel so much lighter. I feel
Wow.
so much more
That's
alive.
amazing.
I feel so good. I feel hope for the first time
Mm,
because there was multiple infractions and things that have had happened.
yeah.
And so, um, just to kind of like wrap up what Krista was saying, yes, we see a lot of people. Yes, we see a lot of pastors. And the wonderful thing, or when I see pastors, I mean
Mhm.
ministers and ministry. But the thing is, there's hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What locks people into this is because they're rightfully nervous
Mm,
Sure.
about finding hope because they know that if it gets out, it's not going to look good, and it could be what they built their whole life.
mhm.
The character that their ministry is based upon will be wrecked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and that's hard to swallow, and it's
Mhm.
hard to trust. So they go underground and don't come up for air for a long time.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
right. So, what are some of the common reasons that you see people going down this porn path? Like, what are some of the traps, that maybe
Mhm.
people are like, oh my goodness, I'm here. How did I even get here?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
So usually it's curiosity, and it happens at a young age. Average age of first exposure is between 8 and 11.
Mhm.
So it's not like someone's, 50 and they're like, I think I'm going to go look at porn. Like, usually it happens at a very young age.
And just to connect in with that, we used to ask, have you been exposed to porn?
Mm-hmm.
In our premarital discussions,
Uh-huh.
even when we're working with couples, we're pretty quick to pick up on if it's present.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not if anymore. It's
Yeah.
when and how much.
Yeah.
What has been your exposure to pornography?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, curiosity is one thing that leads someone to be exposed. And then sometimes it's just by accident, especially with social media these days. People will happen upon things that they never intended to look at. So pure people who are Holy Ghost filled, who are living for
Yeah.
the Lord, will happen upon things. And really, we are becoming desensitized as a culture, not just church
Mhm.
culture, but as the 21st century postmodern culture. We're
Mhm.
becoming desensitized because you could be watching a sermon from your favorite preacher on YouTube, and then on the sidebar there's a thumbnail of some half-dressed woman,
Yeah.
and
That's
Right.
right.
you don't click on it, but your brain takes that information in and it desensitizes you. And
Right.
so then you're more likely to think it's okay to have that in your feed, or to not unsubscribe, or maybe to click on it if it was a reasonable tagline that didn't say pornography.
Yeah, just
right?
try to
Right.
drive down the freeway or
Yeah.
go into your local mall without seeing
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
I mean,
Exactly.
it's we're increasingly living in the era that Paul lived in with First Corinthians. When he was
Yeah.
writing to First Corinthians, just
Mhm.
Corinth is kind of like the modern day America.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Mhm.
So, before we kind of go down, if you're already there, path, what are some mental safeguards you guys recommend to people for their kids, young men, young women? What are some things that you
Yes.
guys recommend to them to just say, hey, I don't want to go down this path. What are some things I can do?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, first of all, nobody plans to go down that path.
Right.
So
That's right.
you might be listening to this and think, oh, that's not applicable for me. I never plan to go that direction. My kids will never go that direction.
Yeah.
So the reality is, though, you will be confronted with this fork in the road.
That's right.
And you can think that you won't. And
Right.
then you're just the fool that, the writer of Proverbs talks about,
Yeah.
that, the prudent person will seek the resources and seek protection. But the fool will just act like it's no big deal.
Yeah.
Right. So first of all, I want to put that out there, like, you need to be equipped. But some safeguards, you asked about safeguards with your children. If the average age of first exposure is between 8 and 11, we need to be having these conversations, plural, not the talk, singular, with our children from a very young age. There are lots of resources to be having those conversations. We're actually, hopefully in the next year, maybe by January, launching some resources about having the talks, plural.
Be great.
Awesome.
Which, it'll be, prompts and parent guides, sex ed curriculum, all of the above. But until then, there are some resources out there. There's actually a really good book that you can read with your kids. There's Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Junior, and then Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, the classic edition. And you can start talking with your children about pornography from a very young age, like
Great.
even as young as age 4 and 5.
Wow.
They need to know that there are going to be good pictures and bad pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd also recommend that parents really do think about, if this like kind of preempt it in their mind of like, what would I do? What would I say? How would I go about this if it comes to light?
Yeah.
All right, we should say almost when.
Yeah.
Because if you have a good relationship with your kids should bring this to you. If they aren't, maybe starting those good pictures, bad pictures sort of conversations.
Yeah.
But also they need to be a safe place. The parents need to be a safe place for their kids to bring questions. So
Totally.
that means watching our reactions, because if our reactions are like, oh my
good.
goodness, about everything that's a little bit on the edge and they don't know, then they're going to have kind of a worry about bringing things to you.
Yeah.
They're going to be, I don't know if I really want to suffer through that crazy reaction. I'm going to go ask my friends, or a good friend Google will go ahead and give me their opinion. So just making yourself a safe place, watch your reactions, get on their level, and just be very open to asking what, to answering their questions, but also asking good questions. Don't just jump in right into an answer. Get good at kind of delving in, what do you know, without really saying that.
Yeah.
That's good.
So,
That's
like,
really
what is it
good.
really that you're asking me? Could you please, can you describe what you're trying to ask? Or what, like, so asking more questions before you give any answers, that will help kind of sort out how deep your answer to them is.
That's really good.
I love that. And I think that translates into many things. Marriage, for one thing. If you're kind of reactionary, your spouse will be afraid to bring things to you because they know you're going
Right.
to, blow it, just out of proportion maybe, or just really not seek to understand before reacting. But also it applies in a leadership capacity as well, because I know a lot of people that watch this podcast, they're pastors, ministers, leaders, and you have people coming to you seeking like genuine advice. They really want to know, maybe their parents didn't talk to them about sex, maybe their pastors before them didn't talk about sex, didn't talk about pornography, and so they genuinely want to know. And sometimes people, because of their own uncomfortableness or their own past experience, will be very reactionary, and it causes people to be like, oh, I can't talk to them about this. This is not safe for me.
Totally.
Yeah, and I think before tagging on to the fact that when we're talking about pornography or things like that, we're not trying to normalize the behavior necessarily, but we're trying
Right.
to bring to people's understanding that this is a part of society in
Yes.
by and large. And so we have to be like you guys were saying, we have to have the foresight to be able to have these conversations and think about them before they happen, because the bury your head in the sand mentality when it comes to your children or yourself for that matter is not going to
Or the
work.
people that you care for. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Mhm.
Because I mean, the statistics show you're more than likely going to face it, and even if you
Yes.
don't, you may know someone that does, and you'll definitely know someone that does.
Yeah.
So
Well, you know
Yeah.
somebody that does, but do you know that they're doing it?
right, yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and another aspect of this too, because we're kind of talking about children. I think that maybe the common misconception may be that young boys or teenage boys will seek out pornography, but also
Mm.
there's a high number of girls, young
Yep.
girls, young
Yep.
ladies, teenage girls, women that will get caught in this trap of pornography.
Mhm.
Because to some people, it's still such an anomaly. I've heard people just hammer, boys about pornography, completely forgetting that girls may be
Yep.
struggling with pornography as
Totally.
well.
Yes, you're exactly right. And actually, in the millennial category, it's no different, boys and girls. So, millennials, 18 to 35, 76% struggle with pornography on a weekly basis for males, 74% for females. So,
Wow.
that's not a significant difference.
No.
We're
No.
looking at the same. 3/4 of all millennials are struggling with pornography.
Wow.
And Gen Z, I don't know if we have any
Well,
statistics on
and
Gen
because
Z.
they've changed pornography to fit the woman's needs
Exactly.
a lot of
Mhm.
times.
Mhm.
And just to show you how pervasive, I just read a stat that said that pornographic websites get more visitors or daily visitors than Netflix, Amazon, and
Twitter.
Twitter
Mm.
combined.
Wow.
Oh my goodness.
It's so common.
So it is
Mhm.
extremely common and it's normalized in our world. So what we're advocating is, well, first of all, maybe ask the question, how do we help our kids? How do we help our spouses
Mhm.
to, live in this sort of environment?
Mhm.
Right.
So we know that any addiction, and pornography is definitely an addiction, I think.
Well, yeah, people call it dependency because it doesn't have the same. Your
Yeah.
brain works differently, etc. But there's people on both sides of that coin.
I'm in the
Yeah.
other camp
Yeah.
because, I mean, people are on this
Mhm.
because of the different hormones
Mhm.
The dopamine
and
rush.
dopamine rush. And I guess we can get into this, but
Mhm.
like the body reacts very strongly to these images, and then
Mhm.
you want that release again, and you want
Yeah.
that those those hormones again. So you keep
Mhm.
going back and back and back, and that's the exact description of any sort of addiction.
If you want more on brain science having to do with porn, read Your Brain on Porn.
Yep.
That will change your mind about whether it's an addiction or
By
not.
Wilson,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's a fantastic book.
Yeah.
That's probably the one that convinced me.
Yeah.
But we know that any addiction, though, stands on a three-legged stool. There has to be three parts involved. So it's anonymity, accessibility, and affordability. So
Mhm.
the three A's.
And you got all of those.
When you're
Exactly.
pornography.
So
Sorry.
Man.
yeah.
Seriously.
So think about it. Okay. So how are we going to help someone dealing with pornography, or maybe just avoid my kids seeing it?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Are we going to give them stupid phones? Well, for a certain amount of time, that's going to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is. I mean, I'm not going to give my young 2.5-year-old, like I'm not going to give him my old iPhone.
Yeah.
Here, son, be careful, okay?
Yeah.
So accessibility, you can limit accessibility for a certain time.
Right.
So that's, but here's the thing too, affordability. It used to be that porn, you'd have to go walk down to the shop and, buy the magazine and slip it out, get in your car. Hopefully
Yeah.
nobody sees you, or go, there's much more
risk.
being
Right.
seen. And
Mhm.
but with the affordability, there's a cost there. So, you need to take cash. And so there's more blocks to getting it,
Yeah.
is what I'm getting at. So, but porn, until it escalates, is completely free.
Yeah.
There's no cost associated.
Mhm.
Accessible. It's accessible. It's right there in your pocket.
Mhm.
Mm.
It's on your phone,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and you're completely anonymous.
Yeah.
I could be anywhere in the world. I could be on my job. I could be in my car. I could be in my bathroom. I could be anywhere,
Mhm.
and no one's the wiser.
Yeah.
That's right.
So this is why it's so difficult, and people get so hooked on
Yeah.
pornography, because it's the perfect secret sin.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that, as a pastor, that I've seen is that um, it's the anonymity aspect almost removes the humanity out of it as well. That it is
Mm.
it removes the personal nature of it.
You're
Um,
right.
and
Right.
and
Yeah.
it's kind of the biblical concept of how can I ask for repentance for something that I am unwilling to confront myself.
Oh,
And the
that's so
unwillingness to
good.
confront that.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side of that, if you are able to confront it, then there is so much freedom on the other side. There's
Yes.
accountability,
Yes.
and all of those things. That there's much more
Mhm.
trust built into the relationship if the
Yes.
the
Right.
offended spouse reacts in a
Mhm.
way that makes it more receptive. And I know that's a conversation we'll probably be having, but I think one of the things that I would maybe like to get into is, let's say we're struggling with porn, and what steps can we take to make that personal confrontation, that the
Yeah.
much needed confrontation?
Yeah. 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 And so, the anonymity piece is huge. And I love what you said, that like you can't even repent for something that you're not even willing to confront yourself. You have to own that first.
Right.
And that's hard work. That's really
Mhm.
hard work. We work with a lot of clients who are still struggling with that. They've confessed it maybe to us, but not to their spouse yet.
Right.
And we walked a lot of those people into
Yes.
that space of telling their wife,
Yeah.
and seeing people come out the other side
Mhm.
victorious. So
Yes. Yes. It's hard work, but if you're willing to do
Yeah.
the work, the fruit from that work is worth it.
Yeah.
So, yes, you have to break that leg of anonymity. You're not going to break the leg of accessibility or affordability. And people think they can. That's one of the things we hear so often is I kept doing it for so many years because I thought that I would just repent, that God would heal me of it, and
Mhm.
that maybe years down the road I would tell my spouse that I got over this years ago, and that they would put blockers on themselves, or that they would get a dumb phone or whatever. And it's like, no, those are not going to work, because actually addiction, if you try to limit accessibility, if you get around any blocks that you put in place, it actually escalates the addiction, because the
Yeah.
dopamine rush is that much more.
Wow.
yes, I did it.
Yep. Yeah.
Wow.
So you have to break that leg of anonymity. That's the first step.
Which
So
is the hardest one.
it's the hardest step.
Yeah.
It is.
So I routinely have people into the virtual office, because we're
Yeah.
online.
Yeah.
I routinely have people, and the first thing I do is I ask them, who do you trust?
Yeah.
Mm.
Who do you trust? Because we need to talk to
Mhm.
Yeah.
not just me.
Mhm.
Maybe I'm a good starting point to really start working on this thing, but we're gonna get around to who can you trust
Yeah.
with your life.
Yeah.
Like, and it's amazing when people come back and report to me. So I talk to them. Oh my goodness, I feel so much better about everything.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because people are so much less judgmental than we play it up in our minds that they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
like these people, good friends, want to uplift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They want to uplift you. They
Mhm.
want to see you become victorious and be the person that God wants you to be. They're not.
Yeah.
They don't want to see you crash and burn.
And it's biblical. James
Yes.
5:16, confess your faults one to
Yeah.
another. We always kind of quote that other part, like the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth
Yeah.
much. But like it starts with confess your faults. Like
Yeah.
you're going to have effectual fervent prayer and be righteous
Yeah.
once you have confessed that fault. Kind of what you said, you're breaking that leg of an anonymity,
Yeah.
and you're becoming accountable accountable, you're owning that piece, and
Yeah.
now you can have effectual fervent prayers and be righteous in repentance.
That's so good, because, and then the flip side of that, as a person who can help people, the Bible says that if anybody's taken up in a fault, let those who are spiritual restore such an one. And the
Yes.
problem within the church world today is we are big on judgment and not so big
Yeah.
on restoration, because if
Yeah.
someone falls into a fault, we want to strip them of everything they've ever had,
Yeah.
everything they've ever done, and we remove the human aspect. Now, I know there are varying degrees of fault, don't get me wrong,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
and ministries may have to adjust, but we also have to remember that such were some of us. Like
Yes.
like Paul,
Yeah.
one of the greatest Christians to have ever lived, said that he was the chief of sinners.
Yeah.
And I think
Right.
that's what
And
we have to
yeah.
do.
Totally. Yeah. And we don't know what Paul's thorn in his flesh was. There's lots of
Right.
speculation, but he lived in a Corinth world. Like,
Yes.
what if it had to do with sexual sin?
Oh man.
Such were some of us.
Yeah.
That's what he
right.
says.
good.
It's so we have to keep that in mind. You mentioned that we're big on judgment and not on restoration. Jesus tells us that we have to worship full of grace and truth,
That's good.
right? Full of
Yeah.
we have to, I think so many times we can, I'm not saying we personally, but in our church circles, we can err on the side of being full of truth,
Yeah.
right? Judgment, righteousness,
good.
but not enough grace. And then
Uh,
sometimes a lot of people in the denominational world can be full of grace, but not truth.
Yes.
Guess
That's
where
it.
pornography is rampant? It's most rampant on the far left and the far right.
She is
Ah.
And so we
preaching.
have to be full of
Yes.
grace and truth if
Yes.
we're going to see restoration and healing.
That's so good. Now, I think one of the questions I think that I would have is, so we talk about this, and as a leader looking at someone who has fallen, we can have grace in those moments as a leader, but if you're a spouse offended, grace kind of gets muddled up with emotion and
You're right.
feeling.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I hijacked your interview, honey.
No, you
I had
go
way
ahead.
more to say than I thought I was
Y'all
going
are
to.
doing a great job. This is amazing. I'm just
I'm
here
so sorry.
doing my my listening.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah. So it's like Campbell's soup. Good. I'm sorry.
Good. That's
Um,
right.
This is why I should not be in charge of this
You're
interview.
doing, go. You're
So
doing great.
with a spouse that's been offended, there's so many mixed emotions there. And,
Yeah.
from personal experience, I've seen that usually it's a male. I haven't personally came across a female yet, as though I'm sure I will at some point.
Yeah.
So for an offended spouse, how do we start like repairing those breaches again and getting back to a good, healthy relationship?
Yeah.
Oh,
There are
Call
steps.
us. Our phone numbers will be listed below.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I tell people that this is my favorite work a lot of times is working with couples
Yeah.
and watching them repair from this sort of thing, just because it's so dynamic and so raw, but so the restoration is so beautiful. And it's really a time where you can really see God's forgiveness in human form.
Wow.
Because the person that knew you best betrayed you.
Ah,
Yeah.
Right.
that's so good.
And really, so there's two questions that the spouses that have trust broken on them, they have. How could you do this to me? And how do I know that you're not going to do this again?
Yeah.
And those are the two questions that we center almost all of our work on. So how can you do this to me? That's all in the here and now. What happened? Who was it with? All these other things, the questions that there's always 1,000 questions at first. And it's really important that we ask the right questions. So actually, we're kind of slipping in right now we have a PDF called 5 Steps When Trust Has Been Broken. You can find that on our resources page. This has been very helpful for a lot of spouses. And we use this template
Yeah.
to kind of walk down when trust has been broken. These are the typical things, the movements that have to be made.
Yeah.
These are the changes
good.
that have to be made. And sometimes we walk down these steps several times.
Mhm.
It's not a one and done and okay, good, we dust our hands off and move on.
Which the spouse who broke trust needs to realize that, because they expect, like, they have this huge relief, like they just shared, they
Yeah.
confess their faults, they're experiencing the beginning of restoration, and their spouse just got hit with a ton of bricks. So they do
Yeah.
have to recognize that, you might be ready for this to be in the past, but your spouse is very present with it.
That's a good
Well,
point.
they've been dealing, for a lot of people, they've been dealing with this sin for a long, long, long time. And
Right.
so the first time that their spouse hears it, the spouse who broke trust just breathes a huge sigh of relief. It's like,
Yeah.
it's done. It's out. It's off my back. Okay, now I'm going to deal with the fallout, but we're good. We're going to work through this, right?
Mhm.
But the world has just shifted underneath
Yep.
the trap,
Yeah.
the spouse who had the trust broken. They're just like reeling, like what I
Mhm.
thought was true is completely off.
Mhm.
Reality
Yeah.
is shifted for them.
And they personalize it.
They personalize, what have I
Yeah.
done?
Uh-huh.
And how is this my fault, and all the things that come with that. So, and we're kind of like wrapping up. This is kind of affair /
Broken
pornography,
trust. Yeah.
Mhm.
and we can have broken trust from like a abuse standpoint. Like
Right.
there's a lot of different ways trust can be broken. Money spending,
Mhm.
like we've seen that happen. But by far and large, it's either an affair or porn, and porn is probably the most prevalent
Mhm.
that-
At least that we
Yeah.
see in our
that we work
counseling.
that we
Yeah.
work with. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the first thing is there's a whole bunch of questions that have to be asked and answered.
Mhm.
And the first thing that I say is there has to be absolute brutal honesty.
Yeah.
Mm.
That's good.
Your marriage will not last through multiple phases of lies.
Or
That's good.
dripping the truth.
So I call
right?
it the dripper effect. So this is
Yeah.
what a lot of people do. So sometimes the truth comes out, and because there's so much shame involved, the spouse who broke trust is like, I want to kind of like spoon feed it to you. This is too hard for me just to give to you, and I don't want to break you with it.
Yeah.
So I don't trust you with this really hard information. So I'm just going to give you a little bit at a time. And so what
Mhm.
that does is it trains the spouse who had trust broken on them. They're like, okay, so I got to pull for the information. So they're pulling,
Mhm.
and
like
then,
detective work.
right, and then it becomes a tug of war.
Mhm.
And oftentimes they'll go for like a month, and it'll be things that are going great, and then another piece of truth comes out and just shatters everything again,
Mhm.
Mhm.
and we have to rebuild from that, and then
you're
it shatters. So
and if you do that, you train the hurt spouse's brain to think, oh, this is going to happen again. I can't
Yeah.
trust you this time because last time you didn't tell the whole truth.
Yeah.
right.
And so you're just telling your spouse, in essence, like, I really can't be trusted.
Right, there's always something more, so I'm going
Mhm.
to keep on digging,
Mhm.
which there is so much shame involved with that the spouse who broke trust, that they just want to hold everything at arm's length.
Mhm.
Just get it over with. I'm
Yeah.
going to give you really short answers. I'm going to make you really dig for this stuff because I don't want to touch it. It's too painful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this
Yeah.
is the dynamic that we find ourselves in normally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the shame aspect is such an interesting aspect, because what you talked about, and you hit the nail on the head, is that when the offender has done this, and they get it out into the open, essentially the story for them is coming to an end.
Yeah.
But if the offended didn't know or didn't have any thoughts toward it, the story for them is just beginning.
Yeah.
Beginning.
That's
And
right.
Exactly.
well said.
And so it's this moment of, when number one, I think all of us can agree that it has to be approached. It has to be talked about. It has to be shared with your spouse.
Mhm.
But secondly, when you're going into that, you also have to be ready for those hard conversations.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah.
We
They
need
will.
to make-
They'll
Exactly right.
happen,
Yeah.
regardless
Yeah.
of if that person's ready or not.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
It just
Yeah.
it's going to go either badly or well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And what is your experience? Do most people come to you because they told their spouse and it went badly, and so that's when they decide they need to seek out counseling? Or do you find that a lot of people come maybe before they told their spouse? Like, what's kind of been your experience?
We really get both.
Yeah.
I mean, that latter part is usually like they'll come for couples counseling, and there's like a lot of conflict. There's maybe like issues in their sex life, and they don't know what it
Oh.
is. Maybe there's erectile dysfunction. Maybe there's
Oh.
like weird like tension between the two of them,
Yeah.
and um, oh, Adam's gonna blow his nose.
Oh, that's
We don't
fine.
edit, so
Poor sick Adam.
I know he's recovering, but they'll come to us with tension like that, and then it'll start coming out because we always ask, like, what has been your exposure to pornography, and
yes.
it either will come out then, or there will be some lies, and then it'll come out later. So
Tell
it
you
just
what, Chris is a
depends.
pretty astute. She has a little detector. I've seen her just dig. I'm like, whoa. I guess we probably both have that to certain extents.
I see you dig too.
Yeah, I
We'll do
do.
some 2-on-2 work, and I'll see him dig too.
The thing is you just feel it sometimes,
Yeah.
and it's not
Yeah,
like we're
it's
trying to.
discernment, yeah.
Yeah, we're not trying to, but sometimes it comes out there.
Yeah.
A lot of times, I think though there is a revelation or someone discovers it. I think most of the people I work with, over 50%, it's a discovery by the spouse, and they're like,
Yeah, that
I
happens a lot.
don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Everything is blowing up.
Yeah.
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 And people think like, okay, the spouse who just got all of this, dumped on them, the hurt spouse, they think that, automatically they're in this place where they have to trust again. Trust is a process.
So
Yeah.
here's a really important distinction to be made, that forgiveness and trust are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
So forgiveness is for the spouse who had trust broken on them,
Yeah, forgiveness is for you.
right?
Yeah.
It's for them, because carrying the burden of unforgiveness is such a hard trek.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's
It's
right.
such a hard hike. It's like walking up Everest with a really heavy backpack.
Yeah.
Like it's just it's gonna weigh you down and freeze you out real quick.
Mhm.
So that's one thing. So we work toward forgiveness.
Mhm.
And here's another important part. Forgiveness, I've seen a lot of people with the idea that I have to get to this place mentally where I'm not angry anymore, and I'm totally like cool with what happened
Mhm.
before I forgive.
Mm.
And that's not forgiveness at all. Forgiveness is a decision that you make every single day.
Mhm.
That's good.
Yeah.
So, and there's a lot of times where I forgive, and I hear those words coming out of my mouth with maybe a little infraction with my wife,
Mm.
I hear the words coming out of my mouth, and I'm like, I'm still angry and frustrated. But
Right.
just by starting to utter those things, we're starting to amend our
Right.
relationship.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so it's a decision that's active. It's an
Yeah.
active process that God is working through us and
Mhm.
helping us to learn how, like, as God forgave us,
Yes.
Right.
that's how to forgive. That's what gives us the power to
Mhm.
forgive
Yep.
such wrongdoings.
Yeah.
So
And
that's why
forgiveness is, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's why the Bible talked about forgiveness 70 times 7, because it's
Mhm.
maybe daily forgiveness or multiple times a day when you maybe think
Mhm.
about how you've been
Mhm.
offended, making that decision again. I choose forgiveness. I choose it
That's
over
right.
and over.
That's
It's
right.
it. And sometimes you don't really believe it.
Yeah.
But I mean, can you imagine 70? What do you say? How many times was it? 70 times 7?
Yeah.
Yeah.
490 times.
And, I wonder at like 300 how willing to forgive that person
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
And
there,
of course, God is.
Yeah.
there's such a material approach to that as well. 70 times 7. Can I take it?
Mm,
Yeah, you guys know exactly what I'm going to say.
go for it.
Go ahead.
70 is the age of a man's life, and 7 is the number of completeness. And we say forgiveness
go.
is the life of a man. You live a life of forgiveness.
Mhm. There you go.
Love it.
So
Mm.
good.
good.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yep.
Totally.
I'm going to go back into my chair. Let you guys continue.
Great.
Fabulous.
No, it's so good. Forgiveness is huge.
Yeah.
And here's the deal too. I think this is the next part, that trust and trust building, you have to show the spouse that broke trust has to show that they're worthy of trust, trustworthy,
That's good.
Mhm.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that is an active process as well.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
we engage in trust building activities. One of the things that we really push people to is to put accountability software on their phone, not blockers.
Mm-hmm.
They're not blockers. They're software that watches your phone
Mhm.
and sends whatever's happening. Like there's trigger words that these
Yeah.
softwares look for, that if they see it on your screen, they read your screen, they see it on your screen, they'll send it to your accountability partner.
Mhm.
Now,
Yeah.
isn't that a
That's
grand idea? Chrissa kind of quoted it earlier. It said in Proverbs that the wise man foresees danger and takes precaution. Well,
Mhm.
my friend,
There's danger
if
out
you
there.
are wise, no, not
Yes.
out there. There's danger in your pocket.
In your
Exactly.
pockets.
That's right.
That's
That's
right.
right.
That's going to be the
Wow.
quote for this video. There's danger in your pocket.
That's awesome. Well,
It's true though. Yeah.
what about the spouse that their trust has been broken, and it's like Carissa said, they're personalizing it, and
Mhm.
they're kind of walking through this, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I'm
Yeah.
not sexual enough. What
Mhm.
are the steps that you guys kind of go through with them as they're walking
Mhm.
through that?
Yes. First of all, in order for you to build trust and even to work toward forgiveness, you do have to acknowledge your pain. You have to take inventory of what's occurred and answer like the question, how has my world been shaken? Sometimes we see people coming in on the far end of the spectrum where they're like really angry and they don't want to like, let anything go. But sometimes we see people on the other end of the spectrum where they're like, I'm forgiving. I'm forgiving. I know God's working in him. I know God's working in her. And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, first, let's talk about how your world has been
That's
shaken.
good.
Like you can't just internalize all this. You got to get it out.
Yeah.
And so acknowledge the pain, acknowledge the anger, acknowledge how your world has been shaken. And then the spouse who broke trust needs to lean into that and say, wow, I'm realizing how I hurt you. Now, it's you do have to recognize that most likely the spouse who broke trust had this sin issue in their life way before you.
Yeah.
This happened probably as a young
And they
person.
probably told themselves, once I get married,
Yes.
then I'll be able to drop this problem because
Common myth.
I won't need it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or I'm gonna beat it. But before I share it with my wife, I'm gonna beat it, and then I'll have a testimony to share with my wife.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
a
that's
super common
good.
myth. We hear
Yeah.
that a lot.
It's not gonna happen.
Not
right
going to
away.
happen. And so, yeah, people, yeah. Anyway, that's a good thing to keep in mind if you're single and you're listening to this and you think that you're gonna, not confess your faults one to another because you're not married yet and you're gonna beat it before you get married. Not gonna happen. You need
That's a
to get
good
an
point.
accountability partner.
That's good.
But back to the spouse who broke trust, you have to acknowledge your pain and then recognize like this is not about you, but it needs to be about you as you guys heal.
Good.
That what happened is not about you. But now as you guys rebuild, you guys have to make this anew. This, like, the bedroom has to have a whole new meaning, a pure and righteous meaning. Sex has to be beautiful again, but it doesn't have to be right away. Like you take your time in processing through this.
That's good.
You don't have to jump into the bedroom and try to be a porn star. Like that is definitely not the approach to take here.
That's good.
You want to take time to heal. You're grieving the loss of something you thought that was.
I think that's just to slow that down.
Mm-hmm.
So often spouses don't know how to categorize what they're feeling, and then they think they're crazy because the world is wrecked, and they're like, "How I don't know how to cope with this. I should just be forgiving and all this other stuff." What you're feeling, just to put a name on it, is grief.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You
good.
lost what you thought you had,
Mm-hmm.
and now you're living with a brand new reality. Grief is
Yeah.
always related to loss.
That's good.
So you've lost something. Not to say that it can't be beautiful again, but it's a new thing that you're having to build.
Right. And it can be better than ever. We see that 4 out of 5 couples that seek help for broken trust, whether that's pornography, an affair, etc., they recover and they
Good.
have a better marriage than they ever had.
That's
That's just
amazing.
about all
Yes.
of the couples that I've seen recover. They have a better relationship than before because there
Yes.
were holes generally.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not putting any justification on the actions
Yeah,
of the
sure.
betrayer.
Mhm.
Like, definitely not. But there were things that were not working
Yeah.
as well, and maybe simply just because people hadn't put that much effort into their marriage.
Mm-hmm.
It's just
good.
like we get married and live together and it's just going to be perfect.
Yeah.
But now
Yeah.
they're actually having to put real work
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
into their marriage, and it normally is really a thing of beauty
Yeah.
once they do.
You could think of it this way. It's like your covenant got broken,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And one of the therapists we
Hmm.
follow talks about how the average adult has 2 to 3 long-term committed relationships in their lifetime. So you can look at this like, hey, this relationship came to an end as it was. And are you willing to start anew with this
That's
same
good.
Start a
person?
new one.
That's
Yeah.
That's good.
And so
That's really-
renew this covenant, right? Now, in the process, you're going to have lots of questions. But here's what
Mhm.
we like to say: ask questions, but ask the right questions. So often you get into investigator, detective mode and you ask all the who, what, when, where questions.
And just tagging back, this is the spouse trying to answer for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
How do I know you won't do this to me again?
Exactly.
Yeah.
How
That's
can I
good.
know that?
Mm-hmm.
And so all these questions are aimed at, okay, if I let me make sense of this thing,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
and I'm choosing to be with you, but I don't want to be played a fool again.
Yeah.
I
Trying to
don't
bring
want to
some-
be in the
yeah.
dark.
Mhm.
Right. So they're asking all those questions. But really, what you need to do is say, hey, I have these questions. These are reeling through my mind at night. I can't go to sleep because I'm thinking about the who, when, where, what. But what you need to ask is the why.
Yeah.
That's good.
Now, let them know you have the other questions, but let them know, do you really want those answers? Maybe make a list. And we have people do this. Make a list of all your questions, regardless of what they are. And then go back through the list and think, do I really want an answer to this question?
So
Do I want
remember-
that image?
Right. So remember that answers have consequences.
Yeah.
That's right.
Because those answers will stay with you. And so there are some things that you need to know, like, were you thinking of me and the kids when you were doing this?
Mm-hmm.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
But asking particular sexual activity questions
Mm-hmm.
is not going to
Yeah.
be helpful.
Yeah.
Sometimes. No, of course, this is going to take a
Yeah.
lot of like slicing and
We
dicing.
could do a whole session
Yeah.
on asking
Yeah.
the right questions.
Oh, yes.
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 But asking stuff that's not going to stick in your head and ruin and make things more difficult. So is this thing
Yeah.
going to make it more difficult than before?
Yeah.
If you know that the answer to this
And
question.
we actually have a list of like, it's a couple hundred questions actually of the right questions to ask. The
That's
questions
good.
that really get to character building and what were the missing pieces? What was the gap in your desire that led you that direction? You know, like rather than, well, who was it with, or what site did you go to, and for how
Yeah,
long,
yeah.
and what kind of porn, and all the things that you really
Yeah.
don't want reeling through your mind.
Right.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. What would you guys say to, because I bet, are you putting the timer on me?
I'm
Yeah.
putting a timer on you. Yeah.
Okay. What would you guys say to, there's a lot of pastors' wives out there that are uncomfortable talking about sex, uncomfortable talking about pornography. What advice would you guys give to them on starting the conversation, continuing the conversation, maybe dealing with
Yes.
couples in their church? What can they do to get this healthy conversation started?
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
So they can go to their living room, have their wife sit on the couch, open their big family Bible,
Yes.
and read Song of Solomon out
love it.
loud and with a sexy voice to their spouse.
I love that.
That's
Oh my
awesome.
I can't wait till they write the
Yes.
show notes on this.
That's it.
Josh
That's
is
it.
gonna
But the
be
point
like,
is, you guys, the point is you have to celebrate sex
good.
because God does. God
That's right.
loves sex. And if we can't talk about sex for what it is and the beauty that that sex
Yes.
should be, then how are we going to talk about how sex has been defamed? And I mean, that's exactly what pornography is it's a dysfunction of the purity of what sex should be.
Here's
And
the
so how
key.
you talk about that?
Here's the key thing. How are we going to preach on holiness and outward standards and the beauty of that if we're unwilling to talk about sex? I mean, really, You know,
True.
it's
Yeah.
holiness is such
Yeah.
a key word in the Pentecostal movement. We want to talk about it, and holiness is wonderful. But how
Yeah.
can we neglect to talk about
And
sex?
and two, holiness is a matter of wholeness. And I think that's one of the things we tend to forget. And like the degradation of sex in terms of like pornography and things like that, that actually causes a person that could be whole to become shattered. And so we have to
Yeah,
approach that
that's good.
conversation because we have to be able
Yes.
to look at God is interested in the whole man,
Yeah,
every
that's right.
aspect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I almost want to ask people, do you believe that sex is good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good
Yeah.
question to ask.
What
Mhm.
would your answer be?
Mhm.
If it's head knowledge, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, like, okay, well, maybe we need to kind of dive into that a little bit. Like, think of
Mhm.
Genesis.
Yeah.
He created Adam and Eve, created this beautiful process called sex.
Yeah.
I mean, he really didn't have to make the world beautiful. He really didn't have to make sex enjoyable.
Yeah.
He didn't have to make food taste good. But because he's a good God,
Yeah.
he made food taste good. He
Yeah.
also made sex feel good.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of God, and all of these things are signposts to our next eternal
Yeah.
living place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's signposts
Yes.
to what we're going to experience there.
Amen.
So, and there's another verse that says, don't call unclean what God is, or don't
Right.
call
Yeah.
unclean what God is called clean. I mean, it
Yeah.
goes. There's also like, don't call evil what God has called good.
Yeah.
Right.
God called this process good, and it's beautiful. And I don't know, Chris has ramped to jump in here, but I like to speculate here,
Yeah.
because okay, so God with his foreknowledge understood. I probably need to qualify that, but I won't. Understood that all of the pain and suffering that sex in its misuse would cause. Because
Yeah.
remember, the evil is a degradation of the good.
Mhm.
So he knew that how beautiful sex is, but how the corruption would affect that perfect and good gift.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the free will. God has gifted us with free will, and then we've turned that free will into something horrendous and terrible and horrible. So, but God knew all of this, and yet still decided to give us the gift that we currently have with sex. Isn't that beautiful? Like, God knew that we would twist it, but he said this gift is sacred and beautiful enough to entrust you with it. And
Yeah.
it overcomes the evil that will be done with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I'm preaching this, I will have preached a sermon about what I'm about to say by the time this comes out, but the thought that a vision of God leads to a vision of sin and self, because one of the things that I find interesting in the Genesis, the creation account, when Satan beguiled Eve as the serpent, he told her a lie about God's truth. And that's what happens with pornography, is it tells a lie about God's truth concerning sex. And I think that's the thing, is we have to have an appropriate vision of God.
Yeah.
And then it brings about an appropriate vision of sex. It brings about appropriate vision of sin, self, and everything else in our life. Like in the book of Isaiah, when he saw God high and lifted up. And so I think that's the thing that we're trying to get at, is that we're not irreverent about these things, but we approach them with the proper view of God, sex, self, and sin.
Beautiful.
Right.
You need to let Carissa finish what she was
Oh,
going
I'm
to
so
say.
sorry. Okay, yes.
No, that's you guys. No, that
That's
well
super good.
said. I love it. I think that's so good. I would just say, to add on to like what a pastor can do to
Yes.
really create this culture, create a culture of openness around sex and sexuality by celebrating it. Right.
That's
So
good.
like
That's
Adam
good.
said, talk about the Song of Solomon, but it's not just the Song of Solomon, by the way, folks. Like, this is all throughout scripture.
Sure.
We see this in Proverbs. We see it in Genesis. We see it in Matthew.
Yes.
We like, there's so much about the beauty of sex and sexuality. And you're talking about, you have to have a proper view of God in order to have a proper view of self. We're made in God's image, right?
Yes.
God calls us his beloved. That word beloved in the Hebrew it actually can also mean boiling or bubbling over. Think about that. It's passionate. It's
Yeah.
always active. It's seeking ways to express itself.
That's good.
Like,
Good.
we are God's beloved, and we are in a marital union with him. That's how he wants us to express with our spouse.
That's so,
So
good.
celebrate how we're made in God's image, and talk openly about this with kids and teens.
And practice with your wife.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Practice does make perfect.
Oh my goodness.
See, like,
Practice makes better, at
it's
least.
really interesting. All of us want to be known, and fully loved.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
our deepest desire. That's how God loves
Mhm.
us.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way to know your wife is to ask questions. You can't assume you know what she wants or how
Yeah.
to act or what to do.
Mm-hmm.
We have to first be willing to enter into conversation.
Yeah.
And as soon as that goes out, that's vulnerable.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But the beautiful thing is the only way to get to intimacy is through vulnerability.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
It's leaving everything bare and open.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the thing, this is why porn is so bad, is the buffer to intimacy are secrets.
That's
Mm-hmm.
good.
So when you have secrets, it shuts down intimacy.
Yeah.
That's so good.
And when you have things that you hold back, it shuts down intimacy. But when you
Mhm.
could come wholeheartedly and bare yourself and bare your heart and be able to speak from your heart without holding back,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
that's where you find that beautiful place of intimacy that we all want.
I guess one more thing to share. I'm sorry, I'm almost done.
I
Because
love
it made me think about the book of Genesis again.
Mhm.
Because I'm reading through I'm going through journals that my wife bought me. It's the full set of ESV journals from Genesis to Revelation. And
Nice.
they're very
Very
awesome, very cool. But shame had not entered the world in the beginning, and they were naked. They didn't realize it, but God knew it. And he still
Right.
wanted to commune with them and talk with them. And it wasn't until they realized it that's when they
Uh-huh.
withdrew themselves. And it's because of that vulnerability.
That's
Like
right.
to be vulnerable, to be open, that's what leads to that intimate a relationship, whether it be
Yeah.
with God or whether it be with your
Yeah.
spouse. You have to be
Yes.
willing to be
Right.
vulnerable. And that, to put a little bow on everything, is also how we're going to process through pornography, is through that
Mhm.
vulnerability.
That's
Yes.
right.
And be able to heal and recover from that. And
Yeah.
this has been one of the
Yeah.
most enjoyable podcasts that I have ever
So good.
recorded.
We could have
Aw.
literally gone. So like there's
This subject is so big. Yeah.
there's so many
It is.
paths we could have gone, even like
so many.
how we view our own bodies and how we view ourselves, and just
Yes.
there's just a massive, like, tons of rabbit trails.
Well, since they can't tell us no, maybe
Totally.
we can ask them to be on here again.
In all their spare
We would love
time.
to.
In all
We
their
would
spare
love
time.
to.
Well, this
Well,
is
this is a
something that-
great conversation.
It is.
It really
And thank you
is.
guys for contributing so much to it, your knowledge, your abilities, and
Aw.
and people see you guys talking. Well, this is years of experience coming out now, and so we appreciate all the work that you're doing. And before we finish, is there anything that maybe we didn't ask you, or something about the conversation about pornography that's crucial that you would like to end us with today?
Yes.
As a cute little girl comes up from a nap, that's perfect
I
time.
know. She just woke up from her nap. Yeah.
I would definitely encourage you to trust quicker.
Mm.
That's so much harm will be, so much productive time is
Mhm.
lost in your life when you're just trying to fight this alone. This doesn't have to be fought alone. There's so many other people finding victory around you,
Mhm.
but you just don't see it, because
Yeah.
this is something we don't just share with everybody, right?
Yeah.
But it's being done. Trust us.
Yeah.
And
it's being done.
I would add to that too. We're talking about vulnerability is key. And here's why. Vulnerability is risky. But when risk is met with safety, that's what creates intimacy.
That's
It
so
won't
good.
feel safe at first. You know, when you expose pornography, when you expose the use, the addiction, the heartache, the brokenness, it won't feel safe at first.
Mhm.
But once you start working through that vulnerability, working through it vulnerably, that risk met with the safety of forgiveness, the safety of hope, the safety of let's work through this. That's what's going to create intimacy in your marriage.
That's so good.
So good.
Oh my goodness, you guys rock so hard.
Aw, you guys rock. We love it. We love think on these things.
Oh man, you all are awesome. So we're gonna do our best to link all of these things in
All
the
the
show
resources.
notes. But
Make sure we link the broken trust.
Yes, we'll link that.
Series,
But we'll also just link to all of their resources. Maybe you want to contact them. Maybe whatever the case may be. We're going to link all the resources down below. By the time this has aired, sadly, the Freedom in the Bedroom monthly live date night will have already been over. So, but you can catch
But if
them.
they subscribe, they get all the past content, right? The
That's
monthly
right.
live
They
date
do.
night. So,
That's right.
So go
so you
subscribe.
can go back. Yes.
$10 a month, and you pretty much get a group counseling session. For
Pretty
$10.
much.
It's the greatest
Yes.
deal in
Best
history.
deal ever.
Yeah,
Yes.
ever. That's
Aw.
ever been. It's the
Yes.
greatest deal. And it's the best deal.
It's a fun community for sure.
And so, as always, thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you to Adam and Carissa for making this such an incredible podcast. Are you
It's an
good?
honor.
Yeah. If you guys have questions or comments, you
Oh,
want to give
can't
us
forget
some
about that.
feedback,
Yep.
be sure to text the word think to 910-600-0498.
Yep.
We want to hear from you guys. We
do.
love your questions. We love your comments, all your feedback. It helps us so much. So be sure to let us know what you think about this.
All right, guys.
Yes.
As always, until next time, you've been watching the
Biblos Network.
You want to hear the music?